Evening to all. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Whistleblower special. We've got a stellar cast here of whistleblowers this evening. We're hugely privileged. We've got MP Andrew Wilkie, who was the original Iraq War whistleblower, saying that the intelligence was faulty, and indeed he was correct. He's now a politician. We've got Troy Stoltz, the whistleblower in New South Wales Pokies, who said, look, there's all this money laundering going on. They tried to shut him down and dragged him through the courts while he had cancer. And our Austrac's just come out with a humongous case against the clubs, which is going to get deeper for that very thing, money laundering. We've also got Justin Williams, who is the whistleblower who brought to light and went to ASIC, the regulator, who brought to light coal fraud. That is faulty testing of coal to make the coal from the Hunter Valley look better than it was. There were a number of huge international, multinational companies involved in this, and the case was effectively shut down with only a fairly sort of wet lettuce kind of outcome, with a few directors admonished and their legal fees even paid. So Justin did the right thing. There's a huge cost, and of course, actually, we've got Tony Watson here too. In Tony's case, he was at the big end of town as a lawyer and did the right thing and benefited the country absolutely hugely. But both Tony and Justin have got delicate legal situations that they are in at the moment, which prohibit them from speaking clearly about their cases. But they can make some comments as to what should happen. All of our guests can, to fix this faulty regime, because the guts of it is, if people can't do the right thing and blow the whistle on corruption or illicit activities, then that means corruption builds up in our institutions if they are too fearful to do that. So the laws need to be changed, and we need a whistleblower authority. So without further ado, you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from the stars, who should be getting the King's birthday honours every year, the OAM after their name, but unfortunately they've done too much of the right thing for that. So let's throw to Andrew Wilkie. Andrew Wilkie was the original Iraq War whistleblower who did the right thing and said this intelligence is wrong. We should not be going to war, a war where 1 million people died, and he subsequently became a politician. He's very close to the process, and the Attorney General proposed some reforms in the past few days. Andrew, could you walk us by what's happening, what the latest is?
Yeah, good evening, Michael. Hey, listen, people like us don't get gongs and don't want them. We just want the place cleaned up. And I was actually very heartened that in the most recent sitting week of Parliament, I asked a question in question time of the Attorney General, Michelle Rowland, about what exactly is the government's timeline for reform, and that's in the context of this Labor government was elected over 3 years ago now with a promise of reform, but it's been very slow coming. I'm pleased to recount that Michelle's answer was better than I expected. She did commit to progressing reform of the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which is basically the whistleblower laws for the public sector. She raised, for probably one of the first times in the House of Representatives, the prospect of reform of the relevant parts of the Corporations Act for the private sector. And significantly, Michelle, well, she'd announced it the day before, but she spoke to the issue of creating a whistleblower ombudsman, which, depending on what it actually looks like in detail, it might at least go some way to being a whistleblower protection authority, which a number of us in the Parliament are trying to get up to basically give advice and to support and to protect whistleblowers. So, look, I'm actually more optimistic than I've been for a long time that maybe in this Parliament we'll get significant reform, and it will go to protecting whistleblowers in the future. Because I do know, and I'll apologise in front of all of your viewers. I've tried to help Justin, I've tried to help Tony, but I keep running into an ambivalence maybe of governments, but certainly a legislative brick wall. There's clearly not a lot of work to be done in Parliament still.
What about the opposition? Is there any appetite for reform in the opposition and in the minor parties?
Well, there's a lot of support for reform within the minor parties and on the crossbench. Most of the 14 members of the crossbench in the lower house want reform. Certainly the Greens in the upper house and independents like David Pocock, they want reform. So there's a real appetite for reform. But of course, the major political parties, the big political parties, the Labor Party and the LNP coalition, they have a track record over many decades of being very slow for reform, because I think it suits them that they are all powerful, and that people who might speak truth to power are sort of shoved off into the dark corners, as has been the case for a very long time.
Terrific. Troy Stoltz, Pokey's whistleblower, can you give us a flavour of the personal cost involved in whistleblowing and your view on what can be done? I might just state again for the audience that have just touched base that Troy came out against money laundering in clubs New South Wales, in clubs in New South Wales, which is the biggest gambling sector in the biggest gambling state and the biggest gambling country in the world. And he was dragged through the courts for it with very onerous, vexatious legal things happening to him. Troy, can you give us an idea about the personal cost and what you would like to see out of your whistleblowing?
Thanks, Michael, and everyone else joining us tonight. Yeah, look, it's one of those ones, as simple as doing your job, conscious about your job, conscious about, the reputational risk and the regulatory risk of the employer you work for and the industry. But unfortunately, when it comes to dollars and cents and power, greed, etc., all that goes out the bathroom window.
Seem to have lost Troy there. Tony, do you want to give us a quick thing on personal cost, and then we'll move to whistleblower authority? Sorry, Troy, we lost you there, mate.
Am I back or gone?
Oh no, you're there now. Keep going.
Yeah, sorry. I'm miles away, potentially as a result of what happened. I had to leave the Central Coast, and I'm way out in the bush now where no one can find me. So about 4 hours west of Sydney. You won't find me. It's heavily timbered. No, look, it's not what you expect. You go in, for the right reasons. There's no gut, there's no glory, there's no money at the end of the run.
I think we've been attacked by the NBN. We've got an attack of the NBNs going on there. We've lost Troy again. Could we go on? Sorry, Troy, we've just lost you for now, mate. If you can hear us, we might just move to Tony Watson, whose whistleblowing has saved us, the country, a lot of money, hopefully, but it's come at a personal cost. Could you just give us a flavour of what you think needs to be done, Tony? Because I know you went through the courts and you've done some work on a whistleblower authority.
Yes, Michael. Good evening to you and my fellow panelists and the viewers. I think there's been, I wouldn't call it a sea change, but there's been movement, and just the work done by Mr. Wilkie and David Pocock and the others in introducing the whistleblower bill, which unfortunately was given short shrift by the committee which reviewed it. But they reflect societal expectations that we will, in fact, in due course, get a whistleblower authority. And if I go back to, it was February 19, if you want to quote Labor, in saying what they did. February 19, Andrew Lee said, when we're elected, we'll set up a whistleblower reward scheme, establish a whistleblower protection authority, overhaul our whistleblowing laws, and introduced a single whistleblower act, finally funding a special whistleblower protection. Now, Labor in the first term, as Mr. Wilkie said, has done none of those things, but yet I still think there's a possibility for change. And I'm disillusioned at the delay, but I'm hopeful for the future. It just can't be the case that you have to choose between your career and telling the truth.
Oh, thanks for that, Tony. We'll get back to some of those issues momentarily. If I could just tell the audience, we talked to Richard Boyle, that is the ATO whistleblower, who's finally through his travails after a number of years. He couldn't be with us tonight. It's a crowded panel anyway. And of course, David McBride can't be with us, the ADF whistleblower, because he's in jail at the moment and he's seeking leave from the High Court to appeal. So we're going to do a different live stream on the David situation as that High Court appeal nears next month. But can I introduce Justin Williams? Now, Justin worked for a company involved in the coal industry, thermal coal industry, and he exposed what became a case prosecuted by ASIC, by the regulator, against coal fraud testing. Now, he's under legal obligations not to talk about his case, so we won't go there. But if I could ask him about what he thinks the defects in the system are, given the personal cost which has befallen him, and how he thinks the situation can be improved. Is it just a matter of the laws, or is it a matter of the execution of the laws as well? Justin?
So I think there's some laws that can be improved, and the other panelists, I think, are a better place to speak to that. But in my case, and not in relation to my former employer, but in relation to essentially admissions by ALS Limited, I was extensively interviewed by the Australian Federal Police. Their position was that there was evidence of very large-scale fraud. And an Australian Federal Police officer told me that they were concerned that they would not be able to progress the case because of the significance economically of coal to the Australian economy, which, obviously fraud is a crime, but we have the Australian Federal Police who felt that they couldn't prosecute because it was just such a big issue. The New South Wales Police actually did far more work into the ALS manual adjustment of results than the Australian Federal Police, and they claimed to me that they'd identified over 1 million pages of documents. They had so much evidence of fraud that they weren't able to transfer it from Newcastle to Sydney via their internal IT systems. They had to go and purchase 2 external drives and drive the digital information from Newcastle to Sydney. And they've chosen not to act on fraud. There are 2 Korean customers suing a subsidiary of ALS Limited in the Australian courts, and those are 2 customers that know that they were defrauded because of the media coverage of this ALS fraud. But the Australian Federal Police are not telling other customers that they were cheated. The New South Wales Police said to me that they told me a number of things, but amongst what they said was they didn't need to inform customers because the customers knew that they were victims of fraud and therefore they didn't have to be told. I don't see how they know that they're victims of fraud unless they're told. But this chief inspector had the logic that they know what they're putting into the boiler, therefore they must know that they're victims of fraud when they don't get out what they put in. And that doesn't stand up technically for a whole bunch of reasons. But the New South Wales Police have documented who the perpetrators of this crime are. They've documented who the victims are, and they have not told the victims. We actually have Nigerian police, occasionally inform victims of fraud that they're victims, and we have the New South Wales Police not reaching the level of Nigerian police when it comes to informing victims that they're victims. So we talk about having new laws, but the reality is the Australian Federal Police and New South Wales Police have failed to act even under existing laws. And when it comes to ASIC told me they wanted my case to be the first case where a whistleblower was compensated in Australia. ASIC said they wanted to sue on my behalf and that they were entitled to do so under the current Corporations Act. And then they just chose their mind on doing that. They just, changed their mind and decided not to sue for me, even though they said they would, and even though I relied on that as I was engaged in my own civil litigation.
Would a whistleblower authority, Andrew Wilkie, would a whistleblower authority, and potentially the model that's being thrown up at the moment by the Attorney General, Michelle Rowland, would that help affect some of these regulatory arbitrage sort of issues?
Mute.
I think we lost Andrew there. Andrew, could you keep your sound on, mate?
God, you'd think after 5 years of COVID we would know to turn the speaker on, wouldn't you? Yeah, look, Michael, the creation of a Whistleblower Protection Authority would be one of the single most significant reforms the federal government could introduce. And I get some small comfort from Michelle Rowland's talk about an ombudsman, but I think what she's talking about might be more about after the fact. The challenge actually is before the fact. When you have someone like Tony, like Justin, like Troy, like me back a long time ago, we're in the workplace, we see something that is obviously egregious misconduct, but we wonder, what do we do about it? What options do we have? What is the legal framework? What is the process for safely blowing the whistle? What protections do we have? Look, at the moment, you have these individuals, and quite frankly, we're all to different degrees quite clueless. So if you had a genuinely independent, publicly funded organisation that you could go to confidentially, you could get advice, including, or in particular, legal advice, and someone who would guide you through the process and also ensure that there's no adverse outcome, illegal outcome by the organisation to try and shut you down. Richard Boyle's a really good case study in this regard. Richard spoke up about serious misconduct within the Australian Taxation Office. He was found to be correct, and the complaints he made were found to be entirely accurate. But ultimately, he found himself before a court because of quite a petty point of detail, in my opinion, the fact that him collecting the evidence to blow the whistle powerfully and effectively, that act of collecting evidence was deemed by a court to be illegal. If Richard had something like a Whistleblower Protection Authority to go to guide him through that process, I'd be pretty confident that he would have collected that material or not collected the material in a way that was safe for him. So, look, frankly, I think a WPA, if I could shorten it to that now, would be a very, very powerful thing to do. I had tabled legislation to that effect in the House recently. David Pocock, seconded by Jackie Lambie, tried to do the same thing in the Senate. Both times have gone nowhere. But that's what we need, Michael.
Well, indeed, Tony, who's a very experienced lawyer at a very high level, you even encountered these issues with legally what you would do in the case of trying to do the right thing, but also protect yourself. Could you speak to Andrew's points?
Yes, thanks, Michael and Andrew. I think anyone, and this is what I've gleaned from advising other whistleblowers, you face three huge hurdles. One is they have all the money. Invariably, the whistle is blown in the private sector against a big corporate. So they've got all the money. The second thing they have is normally all the information, because if they have terminated you, you are normally required under your contract to hand back all the things that you ever learned or came into contact with during your employment. So your evidence is deplete. So there's an asymmetry of evidence. And thirdly, they've got the time. So where an individual who, he might see Rio Tinto blowing up sacred artifacts, or he might come across a tax fraud or money laundering. He doesn't have much time if the repercussions start. Moreover, whatever time he does have or she does have has to be spent commencing the action. And therein is an immediate huge cost. because the lawyers all want if they're acting for an individual, they invariably want their money up front. And 100 grand doesn't get you far at all with the lawyers nowadays. So again, you burn your resources quickly, and the other side can slow it down fantastically. So what needs to happen is someone who will stand with the whistleblower, and that is the whistleblower of WPA, to pick up Andrew's acronym. That's the most important thing we could do for our society.
Well, the information asymmetry point that you made, I mean, was certainly Richard Boyle's situation that prevailed, I think probably in all of your situations, but particularly if you can't get access to the information you needed, which you relied upon to prove that the wrong thing was being done, then presumably, Tony, you can speak to this, you've got to wait till you get to discovery some months down the track after, you know, the claims have been filed to get discovery. Is that where the whistleblower?
Yeah, so, and that's at two levels. I've learned from others. It's at the level of the wrongdoing. Now the law says you've only got to have a suspicion based on reasonable grounds that there's been an underlying wrongdoing. But of course, the lawyers for the other side immediately say, well, you didn't have a suspicion. You didn't have reasonable grounds even if you had a suspicion, and there was no underlying wrongdoing, so you're out on all three of them. And moreover, even if you've got any of that, there's a lack of evidence to show that the detriment you suffered was due to the having made a protected disclosure. So there are any number of ways, and the lawyers are very smart. There are any number of ways they can cut you off, and all the time you're running out of time and money. So hence the need. I think there's no doubt now, the evidence is in, that the single biggest way corrupt conduct comes to the notice of the Australian regulators is by whistleblowers. It's not the ATO, it's not ASIC, it's not the ASX doing reporting, it's not APRA, it is whistleblowers. So this argument that we might somehow, test the costs, which came up as an argument against Mr. Wilkie's bill, that is so fictitious beyond belief. It'll pay for itself in the first year for years to come. The American and British systems show that.
Can we move? Could you all have a crack at this one? Can we move to the American system where they reward whistleblowers with a cut of the proceeds effectively, or does that engender vexatious conduct? Andrew, what's your view on that one?
Absolutely. And the experience in the US is that it works. It doesn't become some attempt by people to profiteer. It becomes a genuine incentive. Incentive, that's maybe not the right word. It's something that gets you over that hump. I think that you are prepared to speak up, because I'm going to make the point about blowing the whistle in Australia is diabolically difficult. It's legally difficult. It's emotionally difficult. It's financially difficult. I think back 20-something years ago when I spoke up about the Iraq War, there was no shortage of people in the intelligence and security establishment who shared my view. But and I asked myself, well, why didn't they speak up? Well, they've got the kids in school, they've got a loan on the car, they've got a mortgage. It's going to be the end of their professional career, and they'll, sadly in Australia, the profile of a typical whistleblower is they are in great emotional and professional turmoil. They find they cannot be witness to misconduct a moment longer, and they must speak up. There's no thought or prospect of doing well out of it. They lose their job, they lose their friends, they can lose their relationship with their family, they can end up in terrible strife. And frankly, the anecdotal evidence is that the rate of suicide among whistleblowers is markedly higher than the general population. There is nothing in it for a whistleblower.
It's interesting.
But if the fact at the end of the day they could either receive, say, a percentage of the money saved to the corporation or to the public purse, or at least receive some sort of income support while they go through the process, heavens, that would be a very significant reform, but we are so far away from that at the moment. I'm just pushing for let's fix the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Let's fix the Corporations Act. Let's have a whistleblower protection authority. Let's have media freedom laws so that the media can actually report what whistleblowers have to say. I think these are the essential first steps, but ultimately I would really like to replicate what they got in the US.
Well, that we were just on, for those that have just tuned in, in the US, you can get a cut of the proceeds if you blow the whistle, and that would enable you presumably also to hire lawyers so that you could pay them on the expectation that you'd be getting whatever money that you'd saved. And I think in all of your cases, in fact, I'm not sure about yours, Andrew, because you were the Iraq War intelligence whistleblower, so I'm not sure how that would be financially calculated.
Oh, no, Michael, I got a plan there. I get 10% of the cost of the Iraq War.
Well, that would be a big ticket item. But in the case of Troy, with the untold millions and billions that are made in black money, in money laundering, washing money through poker machines. In Justin's case, Justin Williams, the coal whistleblower, I mean, the Japanese and Korean customers were furious that they were getting ripped off. So if you could have got some restitution based on losses. And of course, Tony Watson, we can't discuss your case specifically, Tony, but it would have been, if this was the regime and whistleblowers could be compensated for the amount of money they'd save the country or the shareholders of their corporation or whoever, or their customers, in Justin's case, it'd certainly be a good thing. But in my experience of whistleblowing, and I've been through, it's 8 years now, Tony, with your one. I was in the middle of Troy's back in the day when the legal turmoil, when that was kicking off, and that was a huge personal cost, I remember, Troy, to you. And Justin, just at the end of your whistleblowing saga, we came in, and the personal cost has been enormous, which means that it takes a fairly extraordinary person to do it, knowing what the cost might be. Can some of you speak to that? The go with the flow issue, because as Andrew Wilkie said, most people, they've got the kids in school and the mortgage on the house and the down payments on the car. I mean, if there's no route to being able to defend yourself against a multinational, then, what do you do, Tony?
Yeah, Michael. So I've made a list of the terms I've heard from whistleblowers who I have acted for or am acting for, and I'll run through them. It's very quick. Gaslighting, shunning, marginalising, ostracism. There are rumours questioning the employee's performance, threats, harassment, reprimands, demotions, forced transfers, assignment to trivial duties, dismissal, and blacklisting. There was one guy I spoke with, and he had his office moved to nothing more than a cupboard. And he was told to go in there at 9 o'clock and come out at 5. So, and of course, why they do it, there's two reasons. The big corporates, they do it for two reasons. And the Chinese call it killing chickens to show monkeys. So they do it to punish the person who's spoken up. So there's just that revenge. But it also shows the other people who are considering it, what happens to you if you do this.
Justin.
It's just been an appalling experience. I won't go into details for legal reasons, but I guess I go back to the point I hear about the creation of a WPA and a percentage of proceeds and things like that. Under the current Corporations Act, ASIC, if they're taking action, can sue on your behalf, and certainly in my case they said they would, but what they can do as part of their action is say this whistleblower experienced this harm. They can get an independent economic report done and say you've caused this harm. ASIC in my case simply chose not to do that. So yes, while I'd like all these other laws, I'd also like the regulator to do something that they're currently, I believe, obliged to do, And in terms of my becoming a whistleblower, I never set out to do it. I didn't choose to do it. I didn't really know what the implications would be beforehand. It's just an awful situation I found myself in.
I think we've lost Troy. I think Australia might need an NBN whistleblower, because Troy keeps bobbing in and bobbing out from the country. But I guess in your case, Justin, the beneficiaries of this caper were the victims were obviously foreign large corporations, coal buyers, weren't they?
Yes.
That's who's getting dudded there, and the people profiteering from it were domestic and multinational Australian coal companies. So if ASIC, for instance, had have done an independent report into that, the numbers, what would the numbers be?
Astronomical. I've done I'm not sure it was stated, but my background is I'm an engineer, and later in life I went back to uni, and subsequently I've qualified as an actuary. But ALS Limited have admitted to, and I've written what their ASX release said. They've said their investigation identified evidence that approximately 45 to 50% of certificates of analysis were manually amended without justification. One of Comepo's lawyers referred to that as fraud in the federal court. They said that this has occurred since 2007 to 2019. They also say that they certify approximately 3,000 cargoes, produce 3,000 certificates of analysis per year. So 3,000 a year, 45% of that is 1,350. They've done it for 12 years. That's 16,200 shipments in total. The average shipment of coal, I've very, very conservatively said that that's 10 million Australian dollars. In reality, for many shipments, it's much, much more. That has a total value of 162 billion Australian dollars. This is what ALS have essentially admitted to altering certificates for. That certificates of analysis relating to 162 billion dollars worth of coal. Question then becomes, what happens if a customer finds out about that, or what happens if the customer finds out that the quality is so bad they could have rejected the cargo? No one's committing fraud for peanuts. They're all doing it for very large stakes. Well, in my experience, if your cargo's rejected, I've only ever seen 2 cargoes rejected in a 20-year career. One of those cargoes, the customer got close to 100% of the cargo value back. And in the second case, the customer actually received more than 100% back. But if we wanted to say something conservative, like you pay 6% of what you got as a penalty, and I just said that that's unrealistically low, but that 6% of $162 billion is 9.72 billion Australian dollars. And the reason I mention that 6% is that the market cap of ALS Limited, this company that's admitted to this conduct, is just over $9 billion. So these 2 clients suing the subsidiary of ALS Limited, if the parent company was held accountable, it's questionable whether this large blue chip Australian company would continue to exist. That's how significant the financial values are.
The values are very, very high. In fact, with that $10 billion, the 6%, you could roll out a pretty decent housing program in Australia for the homeless, couldn't you? I guess those kind of numbers are very large numbers. Andrew, we're still missing Troy, still in need of the NBN whistleblower. But Andrew, just in terms of course, Justin and Tony are both private sector whistleblowers. And obviously government's a large sector, and it's incredibly important. Integrity and governance in Australia is incredibly important. I mean, since you blew the whistle in the early 2000s over the Iraq War intelligence, has it got, making the distinction between corporate whistleblowers and government whistleblowers? I guess David McBride, of course, and Richard Boyle are 2 examples who aren't with us at the moment, but you are. Could you tell us if the culture has changed or if it's any easier to blow the whistle now or if it's harder for government people. Turn your sound on, Andrew.
Oh. I promise to get better at this. Look, there's been a disproportionate focus on public sector whistleblowing. Now that's fine as far as it goes because, Michael, as you pointed out, the public sector is very important. So it's good there's been the focus that there has been on the public sector. There has not been enough focus on the private sector, and both Justin and Tony and Troy, I suppose, were all involved in the private sector. I'm hoping in Canberra to shift the focus a little to give equal weight to the private sector. In some ways, that's the harder environment to blow the whistle, and the experiences of Justin and Tony and Troy are very illustrative. What was the first part of the question?
I just wonder whether the culture had changed within government, and that's an interesting observation because I thought, I mean, what you're saying is it's easier to be a whistleblower in the public sector than it is in the private.
Yeah, look, I think in the public sector they are entirely unsatisfactory, but there is at least some focus, some awareness, and I think the Public Interest Disclosure Act, as deeply flawed as it is much better than the protections in the private sector. Although to give credit where it's due, I think former Senator Rex Patrick and others have pushed it very, very well. Is it any easier? To your question about is it any easier these days? No, it is harder these days. I mean, when I blew the whistle over the Iraq War in 2003, the whole system, the whole ecosystem was sort of shocked by what I did, and they were slow to react. And by the time the government might have reacted over me talking about the lies behind the invasion of Iraq, my position already had a head of steam and a lot of media interest. Would I do now what I did then? I don't know, but I tell you what, I'd be a darn sight more reluctant to do now what I did then. I mean, I basically, got away with it in 2003. Would I get away with it now? Probably not. I think I'd probably find myself like David McBride in jail, because as whistleblowers have become more and more prominent and more commonplace, there's been a systemic and cultural blowback against them. So now, to pick up a point, I can't remember whether Justin or Tony made this point. These days, it's as much about stopping and punishing the whistleblower as it is about deterring their colleagues from following suit. I mean, I do not doubt that the response to David McBride and Richard Boyle was as much about sending a signal to other people inside the system: don't you dare follow them, don't you dare do what they are doing. It's a punitive and a deterrence sort of cultural response. So that was a long-winded way of saying, no, I think whistleblowing these days is harder than ever, and hence the need for reform is greater than ever.
Brilliant comments. Thank you, Andrew. Josh, if you're on board, could you perhaps jump in and ask some of the Patreon questions and just spread them around?
I certainly can. Oh, can you guys hear me all right?
This is our producer, Josh Barnett.
There we go.
Off you go.
So I've got a couple of Patreon questions. I'm just going to bring them up on screen for us really quickly. So I don't have any specific ones for specific guests, so I'll throw to maybe Justin first. So our first question, let me grab this one. Is it this one? Here we go. So from our patrons who help fund, all of these extracurricular activities that we do, like live streaming. First question that we have from Ika is how, we've kind of touched it already, how much is the crackdown on whistleblowers about protecting careers of government bureaucrats and corporate managers? Justin, do you want to weigh in first? Look, you're on mute there, mate. There we
That's
go.
a good question. I'm not sure if you look at the ALS fraud, and they don't call it fraud. They have this other fancy description, which others have called fraud. They admitted to it. I think they've tried to do the right thing. ALS have announced that 4 people have left ALS as a result of the fraud. Not everyone associated with the conduct has left ALS. ALS have still allowed some people there to keep their jobs. SGSAG and Andrew Wilkie tabled documents in Parliament, which I gratefully received from Australian from the Commonwealth Government, and in my view, those documents are evidence that the Swiss major SGSAG was engaged in the same behaviour as ALS. ALS obviously haven't admitted to the behaviour. I don't think it really protects government bureaucrats because they're not directly involved in the behaviour. But my concern with bureaucrats at ASIC, the New South Wales Police and Australian Federal Police is they've chosen not to act. All 3 of those bodies had laws to allow them to do things, and they just simply chose not to. Australian Federal Police literally said it's too big to prosecute. New South Wales Police had evidence, chose to do nothing, and ASIC fumbled the case. Former CEO of ASIC, Warren Day, wanted to see every single coal company involved in the conduct prosecuted and fined. ASIC did not go ahead with that. Warren Day has left. I don't know. Yeah,
No, I appreciate that, man. We'll throw over to Andrew now.
Yeah, look, I'm sure Justin is right. I think the issue goes to an even deeper issue, not about bureaucrats in particular. I think that organisations and governments, whether they be corporations or governments in Australia, they default to secrecy, which is especially problematic because we have a consistent failure of our regulatory bodies to do their job. You know, I shouldn't have to stand up in Parliament and talk about fraud in the export thermal coal industry. You know, I shouldn't have to stand up in Parliament and talk about the fact that up to 95% of registered clubs in New South Wales are failing to comply with money laundering and counter-terrorism legislation. In fact, I think our system has fundamentally failed when someone like me does what I do. Because, you know, what is AUSTRAC doing? What is ASIC doing? What is the criminal intelligence agencies doing? What are these people doing? What is, say, the regulator in Victoria? It's not called this now, but it was the VLC. Oh, I can't remember the acronym now, but it was the regulator for the casinos, for Crown Casino. What have they been doing? They are not doing their job. In a healthy country, regulators do their job, and whistleblowers are not required, and parliamentarians are not required to exercise parliamentary privilege. So I think there's as good as our country is, there is a sickness, or no, not a sickness, there is a weakness within our regulatory agencies that this is going on. And I know Michael Westmealy, I mean, you know, be polite to my hosts here. You do a pretty good job of trying to highlight some of these failures, but it is an issue. I think we need to better resource our regulatory agencies. I think we need to give them greater legislative powers. We need to make them more powerful. You know, in a perfect world, we won't need whistleblowers.
Well, actually, Andrew, this was highlighted by a story that Tony Watson wrote for us, that in the US, while the regulators in his particular instance were were fumbling around. They eventually came down on his side and said, yes, your evaluation of this rort is correct. But in the meantime, there was a crypto fraudster, Bankman-Fried or whatever, who was arrested, convicted, and went to jail within a fraction of the time that Tony was mortgaging his house and taking them to every court in the land except the tennis court, and trying to get justice. And so there's regulatory capture, inertia, and just the wheels of justice grind very slowly. In Troy's, we'll go to the next question in a second. In Troy Stoltz's case, and we've lost Troy, the pokies whistleblower, he's been vindicated too, as Tony was, and as Justin was indeed, and Andrew, all of you have been vindicated. Unfortunately, the law hasn't dealt equally or effectively, and all the regulators indeed haven't either. But there's vindication for every whistleblower here tonight, and some of the ones, James Joseph and Roxy Misco, and many others, I'm sure that I'm forgetting, Richard Boyle, so on. There's been vindication, but unfortunately, the human cost is far too high. Josh, have you got another question?
Yeah, so I'll just pop up my screen again. So I might throw to Tony for this one, because obviously, Tony, you work in this kind of area. So from Memory Head on our Patreon, what is the path forward for increasing whistleblower protections? Is it really possible in this country whose domestic affairs are often dictated by foreign powers? Do we see an increase in public awareness of the abhorrent treatment of whistleblowers? And if so, is this having any effect on lawmaking? So I'll get you to go the first part of that question. Tony, if that's okay, we'll go unmute as well.
Of course. I think Andrew Wilkie has hit it on the head. It's a constant battle with politicians to actually do what they say they will do. Whenever in opposition, you'll get a political party who'll say, "I'll do this," and as soon as they get to power, as Mr. Wilkie says, they default to secrecy. And if the secret gets out, you cover it up and deny it. And I think that goes across the public sector and the private sector. You'll recall the Countess of Chester Hospital, where the babies died in the UK, and there was that there were whistleblowers who said this nurse was doing the wrong thing, and it ended up seven babies were killed in that, and yet the whistleblowers made the complaints, made the observations after the first baby. And it's this whole lack of willingness to act. Either it's not my problem, or there's not enough evidence, and the catastrophic effects, whether it's the deaths of people, the suicides of the whistleblowers themselves, the loss of money to our societies, it is just incomprehensible. So I can only say Godspeed to people like Andrew Wilkie and the independents. If the main parties want to know why, one of the reasons why the independents and the Teals are doing better, because they actually will take steps in important areas like this, rather than be self-focused and concerned only with being re-elected. So I do think there's a sea change. There's whistleblower funds, there's whistleblower justice leagues, the Human Rights Commission's onto it. I think the push is there, but it's just a matter of getting enough politicians to man up and actually move ahead with it.
And something because we got a couple of comments on the YouTube as well, and we try and obviously pay attention to them as much as we can. We just had a question come through, and I might throw back to Andrew this one, because it's his wheelhouse. Where did it go? Here we go. And you guys might be able to see that on your screens as well. Would a minority government have a better chance at passing some of these kinds of laws if gaining majority incentivizes preserving power? What's your take on that, Andrew?
Yeah, good question. Well, it's self-evident that a power-sharing parliament gives a voice to more people, and it diminishes the overriding power of some sectors of the economy in particular, some companies in particular. In fact, when I've been in Parliament 15 years, believe it or not. When I think back I'm now in my 6th term of Parliament, the most reformist and effective and I think representative Parliament I've been in was my first one with Julia Gillard, where although she let me down terribly on gambling reform, I'll give the Gillard government credit. It was one of the most productive and reformist governments in this nation's history, because as the older members of the audience would remember, Julia Gillard had 72 seats and it relied on the support of 1 Green and 3 independent crossbenchers. So, yeah, power sharing is good. It's a really good thing. Can I jump forward to the question just before that about foreign influence? I think it is relevant that when the government responds to issues like, say, the widespread fraud within the export thermal coal industry, one of the considerations is the government-to-government relationship with countries like South Korea and China. And obviously also relevant is that some companies are too big to fail. That these companies do have political influence. And when I think about, well, why did the Morrison government not respond to Justin's allegations about corruption in the export coal industry? It was simply because our export coal industry was too important to bring honesty and justice to. And that's a pretty grim observation to make, that we would think that the export thermal coal industry is so important that we would let it get away with mischief.
And I might throw to Michael for this next bit as well, because obviously someone that we haven't actually talked about tonight is it Dan Duggan, Michael, the expat pilot, right? So he's currently, you're more familiar with the case than I am, but obviously the influence of America with his case is a major factor. Is there anything you want to add in there?
Well, I guess, Julian Assange is probably more relevant, of course. The ultimate whistleblower in a sense, who and foreign influence kept him, just ruined a lot of his life and put a lot of pressure on him. And Dan Duggan, of course, isn't a whistleblower, but he's more of a victim, on my reading of things, of wrongful prosecution and American foreign influence. I mean, it doesn't particularly go to Justin's case where, or as Andrew was saying, it's a power of money proposition, isn't it? I mean, you're coming up against industries which are so close, big lobby, powerful lobby groups, so close to government, that taking them on with all their resources is, and in a sense with Tony's situation, just the sheer financial muscle of these and lobbying power of these companies prohibits, action. But I guess it's all of the situations that David v. Goliath situations we're dealing with here. And I think we probably should wrap up here.
Yeah, I've just got one more Patreon question.
Do you want to ask one more?
Yeah, just got this the final one from Patreon. And this is a good way to kind of wrap it up. I'll throw to everyone. I'll start with Justin though. Let me just pop up my screen again. Here we go. And obviously everyone's coming from a very different background with their whistleblowing story, but Jack Herod from our Patreon, I'm not going to worry about the first part of this question, but how do we get some real change happening when it seems really easy to fix for the government to ignore some of the basic issues with a broad demand for it getting fixed? The one that I want to focus on, which is quite an interesting point, do we need to get ourselves a lobbyist for whistleblowers?
That's a good question. Maybe we do, but I guess my main answer to that would be, how do we fix things? We just send criminals to jail. Send them to jail. They, a lot of this is probably about divided loyalties and misplaced loyalties. Someone facing real jail time is going to give up on their loyalties very quickly. And probably more importantly is, we've talked about the US, but it's worth noting that the two Korean companies suing ALS Limited subsidiary ACURL in federal court at the moment, they are subsidiaries of Korea Electric Power Company, which actually has American depository receipts traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So this is Australian coal companies having ripped off essentially a Korean American company. We call them Korean because they're based in Korea, but a lot of their ownership is in the US and their depository receipts trade on the New York Stock Exchange. So we're ripping off US investors with this coal fraud as well.
Very good
No,
point.
thanks for that. Tony, I'll throw that last question to you as well, because you're kind of a bit of an advocate for whistleblowers as well. Do we need to get ourselves a lobbyist? What would that even look like?
I don't know if we would. I think the answer lay in discerning which politicians are brave enough to actually action it. And by the way, just my concluding remark, I've had a crack at some politicians for what I perceive as hypocrisy in saying one thing and then not doing it or doing something else. But it extends, of course, to the private sector. And if Michael ever wanted to do an article on that, one great thing I've read recently was the response of the ANZ when the Royal Commission was on, about how good we'll be, and our sincerity is manifest by this apology, and we're really going to fix things. And now, a few years later, we've got another $240 million fine for clearly inappropriate behaviour. So I think it's the whistleblower is one thing, but gee whiz, I wish some of the private sector organisations would get their house in order, and then, as Mr. Wilkie said, whistleblowers would be less needed and hopefully under less pressure.
Indeed. Well, it comes back to the policemen doing their job, the corporate policemen, and the various agencies doing their job. So, look, I think we better wrap it on that note. But if I could thank Andrew Wilkie, Iraq War whistleblower, Tony Watson, Big End of Town whistleblower, and Justin Williams, Coal Fraud whistleblower, and Troy Stoltz, who we had on before, the Pokies money laundering whistleblower. All of these cases, and I followed them all closely, they've all been David and Goliath battles of people that have done the right thing and showed tremendous courage and really haven't been rewarded for it. So change and reform is needed, and it's great to hear from Andrew that there is movement, he thinks, in Parliament to change the laws, and let's hope that the whistleblower authority can be set up so somebody is there to ally with whistleblowers when they're trying to do the right thing, because at the end of the day, if corruption builds up in any industry or in any corporation or in government, indeed, it costs all the stakeholders money if it goes, if it remains unearthed for a lot, and just encourages more corruption. Corruption encourages corruption, so more people get on the gravy train. So it's a huge issue for our society and the integrity of our government and institutions. So can I thank you all too who've come here tonight and watched this incredibly important discussion on YouTube, and just on the media thing, which Andrew touched on briefly. I've dealt with whistleblowers for many years, and you do have a interesting relationship. You feel for the hardship that they have and the courage that they have too when they're going through this. And as a journo, you're just doing your job, trying to report it. But some people should. In some cases, they shouldn't go public. In other cases, they should, but they should do it through stealth. And it's not housekeeping and advertising here. Come to us and we'll treat you right. But I think there's people that are considering blowing the whistle have got to look at first seeking counsel from people that have done it, or people like myself that deal with whistleblowers and the potential personal penalties that they'll pay for doing this, because a lot of stories do come out through information being provided through other channels into the media. Unfortunately, the media is losing its business model and isn't as strong as it used to be to stand up to vested interests in corporations and governments. But there's still a few of us around to give that a go. So thanks to all the guests. Thank you, Josh, the producer. Thanks to Troy, who's not here because the NBN's got given up on him. But look, fantastic, and really admire all of you for your courage and integrity.
Rock and roll. That's us signing off. Thank you very much for joining
Thanks,
us
guys.
on Michael West
Fantastic.
Live, Wednesday nights, 6 to 7 p.m. We're hoping to bring a few more of these shows as we get on. Thanks for everyone joining in. Cool. To our guests, stick around for a little bit because we'll do a bit of a post chat after. But in saying that, let's sign off. Okay. Thank you very much. And that